Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Very little time had passed in the river-defying sect since Bai Xiaochun's shocking performance. In fact, even including the shakedown, it had only been a handful of hours. The cultivators of the three sects were still fleeing, and the disciples of the river-defying sect were still chasing them down. The area surrounding the river-defying sect was in complete chaos. There was nothing the patriarchs could do to get the disciples to calm down. Earlier, they had been in a situation of deadly crisis, and under the most incredible stress imaginable. Now, they were finally able to vent. 250 kilometers, 500 kilometers, 1,000 kilometers. Before long, the cultivators of the three sects were completely driven away. Those who could not escape chose to surrender. After the chase reached the 1,500-kilometer mark, the enthusiasm of the river-defying sect cultivators began to fade. They were also starting to get exhausted. Eventually, at that 1,500-kilometer mark, the patriarchs issued orders to cease the pursuit. The fleeing cultivators of the three sects could finally breathe sighs of relief and scatter in terror. All of them knew that the river-defying sect was going to rise to prominence. Bai Xiaochun had completely turned the tables on them, and although the river-defying sect had sustained heavy losses, in the end, they had achieved victory. Any disciples from the other sects who ran into river-defying sect cultivators in the future would be filled with terror, and not dare to do anything to provoke them. The battle had seen them completely defeated, both physically and in spirit. As could be imagined, news of the conclusion of the battle spread like wildfire throughout the cultivation world of the middle reaches. The lower reaches were shocked, and the general structure of the middle reaches was already changing. Obviously, it created a stir back in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect as well. After all, the three great sects had obtained their tacit approval before making their move. In addition to that, Bai Xiaochun wasn't just a member of the river-defying sect. He was a disciple of the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect as well, and had also served as a major general at the Great Wall. Historically speaking, major generals would always join the Hall of Steel Veins, and become the most powerful of elders back in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. And that was not to mention the fact that Bai Xiaochun had friends in the sect. For example, there was Zhao Tianzhao and his Taoist partner Chen Yushan, as well as Bai Lin from the Great Wall, among others. In the past, before Bai Xiaochun made his return, such friends had done their best to keep the river-defying sect safe. Now that Bai Xiaochun was back, one could only imagine what the reaction would be in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect on the part of his friends. The Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect would definitely be very interested in Bai Xiaochun's explosive battle prowess. Furthermore, he knew that it wouldn't be long before orders came down about what was to happen next. However, regardless of what stance the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect would take, the river-defying sect currently needed stability after its huge fight. They needed to rest and recuperate. Their victory had come at great cost. The spell formation cast by the dire Skybanyan had been almost completely destroyed, and required extensive repairs. The reserve powers of the four divisions had been either seriously damaged or completely eradicated. Most of the sect headquarters had been destroyed. Of the mountain ranges belonging to the four divisions, 2.5 had collapsed, and would need significant help from the patriarchs to rebuild. By the time Bai Xiaochun and Li Qinghao got back, the repair work was already underway. Many people were thrilled to see Li Qinghao, including Zhao Yuandong, Patriarch Spirit Stream, and many other friends. Xu Meixiang was especially happy. She had been in despair before, so to finally see Li Qinghao again caused tears to stream down her face. Li Qinghao was deeply moved to finally see Xu Meixiang after more than half a year of being locked away. As soon as their gazes locked, Bai Xiaochun blinked a few times and then smiled. On the way back, he had given Li Qinghao a diva soul, and had done more work treating his injuries. Therefore, he felt comfortable leaving him alone with Xu Meixiang, and instead took Bruiser on a tour through the sect. As soon as he saw the extensive damage close up, and all of the wounded disciples, his mood sank. The truth was that the sect had sustained bitter casualties and many deaths. However, they had made gains as well. They took tens of thousands of captives, and had also seized numerous magical items and other resources. Even better than that were the numerous reserve powers and precious treasures belonging to the three sects, items that their diva patriarchs had left behind, and which had been collected by river-defying sect disciples. Bai Xiaochun wasn't the only one to have performed dramatically in battle. Although he had been the one to turn things in the favor of the sect, Bruiser was actually one of the main ones who had kept the sect going until Bai Xiaochun got there. Bruiser's cultivation base was already in the great circle of the nascent soul stage, and he was a beast king, meaning that he could fight with devas if he really needed to. Although he couldn't come out on top in such a fight, his battle prowess was still shocking. Furthermore, since he was a beast king, as long as enough time passed, he would eventually reach the Diva realm, which would be of indescribable benefit to the sect as a whole. In addition to Bruiser, Song Junwan had performed spectacularly. Although she wasn't in the nascent soul stage yet, only the great circle of core formation, she had wielded the middle peak blood sword with precision and valor. She had surpassed the leaders of the other mountain peaks to become a virtual blood fiend, leading the entire bloodstream division in their fight against the enemy. There were also chosen from the spirit stream division who had fought valiantly. Shangguan Tianyu was one of them. He was now in the pseudo-nascent soul stage, and forgetting Bai Xiaochun and the most powerful experts, was the strongest disciple in the sect, and quite famous. After all, the patriarchs said that Shangguan Tianyu was the reincarnation of a sword immortal. Furthermore, his personality had changed dramatically. He was much more silent and serious, something that made the other disciples respect him even more. And then there was Beihan Lai. Although he had never been the strongest of the chosen, he had risen to prominence in the fallen sword abyss by reaching Earthstring Foundation establishment. He was now in the late core formation stage, and although he couldn't surpass Shangguan Tianyu, was still considered far beyond the others of his generation. The other divisions also had chosen who had risen to the heights of glory. It went without saying that the sect would soon dole out rewards for them, and that they would have a bright future in the days to come. As Bai Xiaochun saw one familiar face after another, and saw everyone looking back at him with fervor and passion, he suddenly felt a warm feeling rise up within him. It was the feeling of being home. It was something he had never really felt back in the wildlands. And that was because, for all eternity, this would be the place he called home. As the sect went about the repair work, Bai Xiaochun joined in. At one point, he ran into the Heavenhorn Ink Dragon, who had been seriously injured and was gasping for breath. Others in the sect had attempted to treat him, but at the moment, he seemed like he might slip into death at any moment. Bai Xiaochun immediately went to work, calling upon the power of his heaven-down nascent soul to gradually heal his wounds. Bruiser had disappeared, but he came back around the time Bai Xiaochun finished treating the old dragon. When Bai Xiaochun saw him, his eyes went wide. Bruiser was flanked by a large number of strange spirit beasts. Some were large and some were small, but without exception, all were female. "Are these your wives?" Bai Xiaochun asked, stunned. Bruiser made a whinnying sound, which caused Bai Xiaochun's heart to tremble in shock. "And them," Bai Xiaochun continued, pointing at a group of more than 1,000 strange-looking little beasts behind the females. An expression of pride appeared on Bruiser's face, and he made a few chuffing sounds. Although many people in the sect had already come to guess the truth, none of them understood the situation better than Bai Xiaochun. "Well damn, those are all your children?" Tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth, Bai Xiaochun looked at the female beasts, and then all the tiny beasts, and was suddenly completely convinced of how amazing Bruiser was. Bruiser was very pleased to see Bai Xiaochun reacting this way. Looking back at all the female beasts, he made a few barking sounds. Immediately, all of the spirit beasts dropped down onto their knees and howled at Bai Xiaochun. There was nothing fierce about it. It was a cry of respectful greeting given to someone of the senior generation. Bai Xiaochun smiled wryly, fully aware of what Bruiser was trying to say. Bopping Bruiser on the head, he sighed. Since Bruiser was his son, then these beasts were his daughters-in-law and grandchildren. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Bai Xiaochun patted his bag of holding to produce some wildland soul medicine to give out as a gift of greeting. After all, soul medicine could be used like spirit stones by soul cultivators, but could also be very effective for spirit beasts. Furthermore, it was very rare in the Heavenspan River region. The spirit beasts were all very excited to receive soul medicine from Bai Xiaochun, and began to cry out in joy. Bruiser was obviously very happy, and looked exactly like someone from the senior generation who had been given a lot of face. Seeing Bruiser so happy put a smile on Bai Xiaochun's face, and he sighed. "Yeah, I really am home." The entire sect was bustling. The air buzzed with conversation as Patriarch Spirit Stream and the other powerful experts utilized mountain hurling, sea-draining magical techniques to repair the damage done to the 4 mountain ranges that made up the headquarters. The Pillstream division used all of their power to save the dire Skybanyan, and also had all disciples working around the clock to concoct medicinal pills. The profound stream division was hard at work repairing the spell formations that protected the sect, as well as the countless magical items that disciples of the sect had damaged during the course of battle. The spirit and blood stream divisions had taken the lead in the actual fighting, and therefore, many of them went into secluded meditation to recover. Those who were able assisted in the repair work to the sect itself. When Bai Xiaochun found Song Junwan, she was busy administering the affairs of Middle Peak. Although she very much wanted to spend some alone time with him, and speak of various matters of the heart, her current duties were more important. Because of Bai Xiaochun's current status in the sect, as soon as he showed up, the disciples gazed at him with fervor and adoration. In fact, the way they clasped hands in formal greeting caused the repair work to slow down. Bai Xiaochun savored the wonderful sensation, and was preparing to leave when he realized that he really should offer some words of encouragement. However, before he could even open his mouth, Song Junwan glared at him and shooed him away. He rubbed his nose awkwardly as he walked off. Although he was inclined to defy Song Junwan, merely looking at her caused him to think back guiltily to what had occurred in the wildlands with Mistress Red Dust. The prospect of what could happen if Song Junwan and Hu Xiaomei found out caused his heart to tremble with fear. As far as Hu Xiaomei went, Bai Xiaochun had learned from Li Qinghao that both she and Ghost Fang had been taken away by the Celestial over half a year ago, to serve as special guards on Heavenspan Island. Apparently, Heavenspan Island occasionally recruited special guards to serve on the island. To the sects in the Heavenspan River region, any cultivator selected for a position like that was being bestowed with good fortune. Furthermore, not everyone who was initially recruited would end up serving on the island. Many of them would be sent back after a short period of time. Even those people would experience a significant boost in cultivation base, though. As for those who remained to serve, they ended up earning extremely high status, and would be treated with the utmost courtesy even by the river source sects. Bai Xiaochun felt uneasy about the whole thing, although he wasn't sure exactly why. For one thing, based on his calculations, he was fairly certain that Hu Xiaomei had been taken away at roughly the same time that the dramatic battle had been fought back in the wildlands. Or am I just thinking too much into it? After some thought, he decided that the best thing would be to use this as an excuse to go see Hu Xiaomei. Even as he pondered these matters, he happened to catch sight of Shangguan Tianyu. He stood at the edge of a cliff, his face touched with grief and reminiscence, his eyes somewhat blank as he looked off into the distance. For some reason, he seemed older and more mature. Bai Xiaochun was a bit surprised to see an expression like this on Shangguan Tianyu's face. After a moment of thought, he walked over, and then followed Shangguan Tianyu's line of sight until he noticed what appeared to be a log cabin in the jungle below the cliff. Next to the log cabin, was a grave mound. Shangguan Tianyu held a strip of blue cloth tightly in his hands. His hands were clenched so tightly around it that it seemed he would never let go of that cloth, even if he died. And there he stood, murmuring to himself as he looked at the distant grave. Bai Xiaochun looked at the grave thoughtfully, and suddenly realized that there was one old friend he hadn't seen after returning to the sect. He shivered. "That's Shinki's grave," Shangguan Tianyu said quietly, his voice hoarse and tinged with bitterness. There was no trace of his former jealousy and hatred of Bai Xiaochun. Such things had been wiped away with the passage of time, along with his hot-headedness. "Elder sister Zhou," Bai Xiaochun breathed. He thought back to what he remembered of Zhou Xinqi, who had once been Li Qinghao's apprentice, the famed elder sister Zhou of Fragrant Cloud Peak. He thought about how he had leapt at the chance to help her hunt down the chicken-thieving fiend of years past, and how he had made fun of her by calling her sect niece Xinqi. They were memories that Bai Xiaochun would never be able to wipe away. His breathing suddenly turned ragged, and he began to tremble. There was nothing that would cause his heart to be weighed down more than a friend his own age passing away. She would be an eternal part of his memory, and yet, everything she had ever said and done was now gone forever. When Shangguan Tianyu saw how Bai Xiaochun was reacting, the grief in his eyes grew more intense. Shangguan Tianyu wasn't sure when it had happened, but he had fallen in love with Zhou Xinqi, and she with him. However, even after she died, he had never spoken his feelings out loud. 10 years ago, Zhou Xinqi had been out on a mission for the sect when she ran into some cultivators from the Polarity River Court. A fight broke out, and she was killed. Although Shangguan Tianyu had avenged her death, he had never been the same afterward. He had become quieter and less impulsive. He worked hard on his cultivation, and had slowly but surely become the strongest cultivator of his generation in the river-defying sect. And yet, Zhou Xinqi's face was always there in his heart. The blue strip of cloth he held in his hands now had been a gift from her, and was something he would keep with him for all eternity. Bai Xiaochun stood there quietly, looking at Zhou Xingqi's grave. After a long moment passed, he clasped hands and bowed deeply at the waist. Shangguan Tianyu closed his eyes. After some time passed, he opened them again, and looked over at Bai Xiaochun. Thank you, Bai Xiaochun. With that, he turned and walked off, looking profoundly bleak. Bai Xiaochun watched him leave, then stood there for a long time looking at Zhou Xingqi's grave, his heart heavy. He simply couldn't stop thinking about what she had looked like all those years ago. He suddenly realized where those white hairs on Li Qinghao's head had come from, the death of one of his beloved apprentices. Why does cultivation have to be all about fighting and killing? It was the same question he had been asking himself from the moment he entered the cultivation world. After everything he had seen and experienced, you would think he would have found an answer already. But he hadn't. Eventually, he left, thinking about how there were still so many things he didn't understand. Although the sect had won a great victory, it came with many tears. As he walked along, he sent his divine sense out to examine the home he had been away from for so long. One of the first people he noticed was Beihan Lai. In a remote location in the sect was a huge graveyard, within which were buried countless heroic souls who had fallen in battle. That was where Beihan Lai stood, in front of a gravestone that he had personally carved. There was no name on the gravestone. There was only a carving of a big, black dog. Beihan Lai held an alcohol flagon in his hand. The passage of years was clearly visible on his face. The hair at his temples was white, and he seemed much older. The aroma of alcohol surrounded him as he looked at the grave, mixed emotions playing out on his face. That big black dog had died saving his life. Bai Xiaochun's heart yet again filled with complex emotions. He suddenly realized that many things had happened of which he wasn't aware. Although the fact that the black dog was dead filled his heart with grief, he decided not to interrupt Beihan Lai. Instead, he sent his divine sense sweeping over the countless other graves in the area. Some of the names were familiar, others were not, but they all caused him to tremble. It was around this time that Gongsun Wan'er's brother, Gongsun Yun, happened to find Bai Xiaochun. Gongsun Yun was visibly older than before. He had reached core formation, but only the early stage. By now, he was no longer the famous person he had been back during the chosen battles between the north and south banks of the Spirit Stream sect. Both Beihan Lai and Ghost Fong had long since left him behind. However, he never lost his dignity, nor his pride because of his little sister. Although his sister had become very cold and distant after returning from the Fallen Sword Abyss, and had seemed very different, the fact that she ended up being taken away to the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect proved how incredible she was. Unfortunately, she had ended up being teleported out into the wildlands, to parts unknown. That had been a heavy blow to Gongsun Yun, and a source of constant anxiety. Gongsun Yun was trembling with nervousness, and yet he braced himself, clasped hands, and said, "P. Patriarch Bai, you're back, sir. Song K and Master God Diviner too. Do you have any news about my sister?" Bai Xiaochun stood there quietly, complex emotions flickering in his eyes as he looked at Gongsun Yun. After a moment of hesitation, he decided not to tell him the truth. Wan'er died in battle at the Great Wall. She gave her life to save a friend. Gongsun Yun stood there stiffly for a long moment, tears welling up in his eyes before they poured down his cheeks. Although he had long since suspected that this was what had happened, he had still held out hope. But not anymore. Clasping hands, he walked off, tears streaming down his face. Even after seeing Gongsun Yun's sorrow, Bai Xiaochun still didn't tell him the truth. There was no way he could. How could he possibly explain that Gongsun Wan'er had actually been killed long ago in the Fallen Sword Abyss? It would be too cruel to tell Gongsun Yun that the little sister he had seen afterward was really that bizarre girl. Bai Xiaochun simply couldn't bear to deliver such a bitter blow. Instead, he told Gongsun Yun a story in which his sister sacrificed her life as a hero. The story he told wasn't without its flaws, and apparently Gongsun Yun realized that. But he didn't ask any follow-up questions. "Little sis, was that really you who came back to the sect?" he thought. The truth was that he had asked himself that same question on many occasions, and didn't really want to know the answer. After Gongsun Yun left, Bai Xiaochun felt even worse than before. He didn't like feeling like this. He liked being happy and having fun. However, as he grew up, he realized that such emotions were inescapable. Oftentimes in the past, he was able to bury such feelings, but right now, all the graves he had seen caused Zhou Xingqi's face to float in his mind even more clearly than before, as well as many other familiar faces. They were images he simply couldn't dispel. At the moment, no other patriarch in the sect had a better chance of becoming a diva than Patriarch Spirit Stream. He was in a better position than even Patriarch Bloodstream. Patriarch Spirit Stream could sense the bleakness of Bai Xiaochun's mood. As he looked at him from a distance, he could tell from the fluctuations of his divine sense how sorrowful he was. Although he didn't understand Bai Xiaochun as well as Li Qinghao did, he had been there to watch him grow into the person he was. At some indefinite point, he appeared next to Bai Xiaochun, although he didn't interrupt him. He just stood there, looking at all of the graves of the river-defying sect. Eventually, when the time was right, he spoke in a hoarse voice filled with age. Xiaochun, look around. Can you tell what's different about the sect? Bai Xiaochun had long since become aware that Patriarch Spirit Stream had come to stand next to him. However, he was in too bad of a mood to say anything. In response to the Patriarch's words, he looked around. The sect was filled with a buzz of noise as all sorts of repair work went underway. Everyone was toiling away. Although nothing dramatic was happening, close examination revealed that the sect was rapidly returning to its previous state. It wouldn't be long before it thrummed with just as much life as before. As for all of the disciples of the three sects who had been captured, they were important bargaining chips that could either be absorbed into the sect as new disciples, or traded with the three sects for remuneration. Do you know what's different? Patriarch Spirit Stream asked again. Do you know why all of the disciples are working so hard? Do you know why they are all so focused? Because this isn't just their sect. It's their home. Spirit Stream sect. River-defying sect. It doesn't matter. They're the same. The good fortune of the disciples is the good fortune of the sect. That's the most important thing. As long as the disciples have enough faith and trust in the sect, then, the sect will be their home. And the truth is that our sect is a home to all of us, patriarchs included. Patriarch Spirit Stream was very, very old, and in fact, if it weren't for the fact that he relied on a special secret magic, he would have long since perished. Perhaps because of that secret magic, or perhaps because of the dramatic events that the river-defying sect had seen in recent years, his face was covered with even more wrinkles than ever, making him seem even more ancient. At this point, Bai Xiaochun's mood stopped sinking. However, there was still something gnawing at his mind. Slowly but surely, he looked over at the Patriarch. Patriarch, don't we cultivators practice cultivation so that we can live forever? Why do we have to go around fighting and killing all the time? As long as we're alive, there are endless possibilities. But once we die, then what's the point of it all? This question had been lodged deep in Bai Xiaochun's heart for many years and would not go away. It was a profound question, and in response, Patriarch Spirit Stream simply stood there quietly for a moment. The truth was that he didn't have an answer. A long moment passed, and he seemed to grow a bit older. Then he looked back at Bai Xiaochun, his eyes warm but tinged with pain. It was pain because of the sorrow he felt for his most outstanding of all the Spirit Stream Division disciples. After all, he knew that from the first day Bai Xiaochun had joined the sect, he had feared death and dreamed of being able to live forever. Patriarch Spirit Stream had watched this disciple tackle the brutal cultivation world, and yet never forget his dream of living forever. There was a purity and innocence in that which was very, very rare. Xiaochun, he said softly. You're right. As long as we're alive, there are endless possibilities. But just because we die doesn't mean that our hopes and dreams die with us. I can't speak for anyone else, but I can say that when I look at all of these graves, I'm absolutely certain that these disciples who died in battle did it because of the Tao that existed in their hearts. What do you mean Tao? Bai Xiaochun replied, confused. He had been asked a similar question back in the Rainbow Trial by Fire in the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect. And although he had never answered the question, he had the vague feeling that his Tao was to live forever. The word Tao is profound and deep, the Patriarch answered. No one can really explain it perfectly. As for me, only by living for many, many years have I been able to experience what it means. Tao is focus. Think about all of these heroes who fell in battle. Do you think they weren't afraid of death? Do you think they didn't want to live forever? They were afraid, and they did want to live forever. But the sect was their home, and they were fighting to defend and protect it. They were willing to sacrifice their own lives, even to the point of giving up on their own wishes and desires. No matter how much it pained them, they swore to die defending their home. As for me, I long since made up my mind. Even if everyone else managed to escape, I would stay behind. If our sect goes down in flames, I will go with it. Isn't it the same with you, Xiaochun? Back in that battle in the Luocan Mountains, why did you go back to save your fellow disciples? Didn't you know that if you went back, you might die? What would have happened if, instead of facing 3 devas earlier, it was 3 demigods? Would you have come to fight? Or would you have lingered in the distance, watched us die, and then fled? The words struck Bai Xiaochun's heart like a lightning bolt. He had never thought of questions like this before, and wasn't even sure how to answer them. The truth was that in the sect's moment of impending doom, he hadn't been thinking of anything. He just couldn't stand to watch it be wiped out in front of him, and had felt he had no choice but to advance into battle. As he pondered these matters, he was suddenly struck by a revelation. Although his focus in life was to live forever, there were too many other things in the world he cared about. He couldn't simply forget about those things, and that meant that, even if he didn't like it, sometimes he had to resort to fighting and killing. It was like a natural law of heaven and earth. When danger threatened his friends, his family, his sect, or his home, then it didn't matter how much he wanted to live forever. He would always do the same thing. He would always make the same choice. Life and death. Considering how many years Patriarch Spirit Stream had lived, and the state of his longevity, when he talked about life and death, it somehow seemed more meaningful. Sometimes, you might be alive, and yet be dead to certain people. And sometimes, you might be dead, and yet be alive. Zhou Xinqi perished, but she lives for all time in Shangguan Tianyu's heart. That black dog is dead, but exists eternally for Beihan Lai. Look at all the names on these graves, Xiaochun. These disciples died in battle, but from now on, everyone in the river-defying sect will remember them. Who will ever dare to forget them? Patriarch Spirit Stream spoke with decisiveness that could sever nails and chop iron. His words were like a thunderclap that resonated in Bai Xiaochun's mind and heart, causing a tremor to pass through him. It was almost as if a door had been opened inside of him, making certain thoughts and feelings which had once been obscured to suddenly be as clear as day. His eyes flickered with enlightenment at the profound implications of the words which had just been spoken. He suddenly felt as if he understood the meaning of life and death, and also understood why he would always make that one particular choice. It was because of focus. Although grief still existed in his heart, the more he thought about his new understanding, the more that grief resembled respect. Then he clasped hands and bowed deeply to all of the graves. Even after a long moment, he didn't rise from his bow. I understand now, Patriarch, he murmured. He was bowing to those who had died in battle, to their sacrifice, to their fearlessness. He was bowing to the souls of true heroes. As long as the sect existed, then these disciples who had fallen in battle would live in the hearts of the sect for all eternity. They had died, but would exist for all time. Upon seeing that Bai Xiaochun's reservations had been cleared up, a smile broke out on Patriarch Spirit Stream's face. The truth was that he cared very much for Bai Xiaochun, and not just because of how he had just defeated the 3 enemy devas. Bai Xiaochun was the heart and the soul of the river-defying sect. It didn't matter that the spirit and bloodstream divisions were now fully integrated, there was no one who could replace Bai Xiaochun. Most importantly, Bai Xiaochun had the most orthodox and proper background within the spirit stream division. All of a sudden, the Patriarch seemed to remember something. Xiaochun, you were missing for a long time in the wildlands. Now that you're back, I have to ask, did you hear about the matter of the Celestial selecting a new apprentice? The Celestial is picking a new apprentice? Bai Xiaochun said, a look of shock appearing on his face. The Patriarch nodded. Even I'm not too familiar with what happens in this situation. However, the entire affair should be kicking off soon. All 4 of the river source sects are making preparations. According to what I heard, any nascent soul cultivator can join the running. As long as they're from the Heavenspan River region, it doesn't matter if they belong to a sect, a clan, or even if they're a rogue cultivator. All nascent soul cultivators qualify to go to Heavenspan Island. Patriarch Spirit Stream sighed. Considering how old he was, he knew that he wasn't suitable for such a position. After all, there was no shortage of nascent soul cultivators in the Heavenspan River region. For one nascent soul cultivator to beat so many others to win a spot would be like a mortal being able to ascend to the heavens. However, there was hope for Bai Xiaochun. Despite the fact that he could clearly defeat almost anyone else in his generation, he clearly had not yet become a diva. Despite being merely a half-diva, he had killed one true diva, crippled another, and forced a third to flee. Patriarch Spirit Stream had never heard of anything like that happening in the eastern Heavenspan River, and although he couldn't be sure if something as heaven-defying had occurred in the other 3 major rivers, he knew it was definitely unprecedented. This was Bai Xiaochun's first time hearing about the Celestial taking a new apprentice, but all it did was cause him to shake his head. Because of what he had witnessed in that spectacular battle in the wildlands, he just didn't have a very good impression of the Celestial. The mention of the Celestial immediately got him thinking about Hu Xiaomei, so he asked the Patriarch about her. Hu Xiaomei and Ghost Fong were both taken to Heavenspan Island about a decade ago, along with several thousand others. That was accomplished, not by battle, but by assessment of talent and other factors. Hu Xiaomei apparently had unusual talent in certain areas. Assuming she follows instructions and excels in cultivation, she'll have a chance to become a special guard there. This sort of thing only happens once every few hundred years. Out of those 10,000 cultivators, only a few hundred will end up as special guards. Patriarch Spirit Stream clearly didn't know a lot about the situation, but obviously had high hopes for the outcome. At the moment, there was a lot of work to do to get the river-defying sect back in order, and therefore, Patriarch Spirit Stream turned to leave. As he did, he recalled how close Hu Xiaomei and Bai Xiaochun were, and looked back to say, if you want more details, you should go ask Song Junwan. The selection formalities occurred in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, and Song Junwan was there as well. Unfortunately, she wasn't selected. Bai Xiaochun nodded, choosing to keep his reservations about the Celestial to himself. It wasn't that he didn't trust Patriarch Spirit Stream, it was just that his suspicions were too shocking. Still feeling a bit unsettled about the whole thing, he took another moment to look out at the graves, then took a deep breath and left. Before long, it was evening, and a bright moon hung high in the sky. Most of the disciples of the river-defying sect were practicing cultivation. After all, the repair work couldn't be completed in a day, and they needed time to recover from the weariness of battle. It was at this time that Bai Xiaochun finally took the opportunity to go find Song Junwan. On the one hand, he had been missing her badly for years, and on the other hand, he also wanted to find out more about what happened to Hu Xiaomei. Song Junwan had finally taken a break, and was in her immortals cave, recovering from her weariness with medicinal pills. However, there was one person who went to see her before Bai Xiaochun. And that was Song Ke. Considering that Song Ke was a chosen of the Song clan, it was only natural that Song Junwan was very concerned about him. And the fact that he was now in the nascent soul stage was wonderful for the clan. Despite the fact that Song Junwan held seniority over Song Ke, as soon as he arrived, she rose to her feet to meet him. However, Song Ke didn't dare to rely on his cultivation base to act like the ranking cultivator. Hurrying forward, he said, "There's no need for that, Aunt Junwan. Care has come to offer greetings." Acting with the utmost courtesy, he clasped hands and bowed, just like he had back when his cultivation base was far inferior to hers. Song Junwan was very pleased with how circumspect he was being. However, that didn't stop her from offering some advice. "Care, now that you have a nascent soul, it's only proper for me to receive you formally. Although we can't forget matters of protocol, in the cultivation world, strength demands respect." Song Ke smiled bitterly, reminding himself that if it weren't for Bai Xiaochun, things would be very different. Considering that he was very close to the mid-nascent soul stage, everyone in his clan with the exception of the patriarch himself would bow in greeting to him. However, considering who Song Junwan was, and her relationship with Bai Xiaochun, Song Ke had no choice but to suppress his bitterness. Although he was a bit pleased to see how depressed Bai Xiaochun was recently, he didn't dare to reveal that openly. Not only had his time in the wildlands forced him to grow up a bit, but it had also instilled a deep reverence for Bai Xiaochun that even he wouldn't admit existed. Furthermore, Bai Xiaochun had repeatedly brought up the matter of himself being Song Q's uncle. Because of that, matters of seniority relating to Song Junwan were far from simple. If it weren't for that, his first visit wouldn't have been to Song Junwan, but rather to the Song clan patriarch. "There's no need for that, Aunt Junwan. In your eyes, ma'am, Care will always be the same boy he was years ago." With that, Song Ke took a deep breath and then bowed formally to Song Junwan. Song Junwan's smile grew wider, and her eyes warmer. She was proud that a Qilin son like this had risen up in the clan, and immediately asked him about his adventures in the wildlands. In response, he hemmed and hawed, giving a vague, awkward recounting of what happened after he went missing. If it had been anyone else, he would have acted a bit more arrogantly. But right now, he wasn't quite sure how to behave around Song Junwan. Song Junwan could tell that something was off about Song Ke. She frowned, which made her seem both more beautiful, and also more grim. Just when she was about to ask some more pointed questions, she heard Bai Xiaochun's voice outside the Immortals' cave. "Wanner, my darling," he said passionately, "I'm back." The instant his voice entered the Immortals' cave, Song Q's heart began to pound. As for Song Junwan, her face flushed, and her eyes flickered with a bit of anger. For him to act romantically with her in front of someone from the younger generation not only caused her heart to start racing, it was also a bit embarrassing. She quickly waved her hand, causing the Immortals' cave door to slam open. Bai Xiaochun strode in and immediately saw Song Ke. Care, what are you doing here? Song Q's face darkened. When Song Junwan saw Song Q's expression, she suddenly looked a bit apologetic. She knew that it was partly her fault that Bai Xiaochun was treating Song Ke like this, and was about to say something when Bai Xiaochun cut her off. Wanner, you have no idea what kind of place the Wildlands is. It's incredibly dangerous. Deadly situations crop up no matter where you go. In order to save Care, I almost revealed my secret identity. I even offended a bunch of aristocrats, and ended up shaking down some heavenly marquis clans. Did you hear that? Heavenly marquises. The Wildlands is huge, but they only have 108 of them. Every single one is a really important and famous person. Sighing in reminiscence, he thought back to the heavy price he had paid to rescue Song Ke. I'll never forget how bad of a situation Care was in when I first found him out there in the Wildlands. He was poked full of so many holes he looked like a sieve. One of those heavenly marquis clans had turned him into a living spirit stone. Do you know what a living spirit stone is, Wanner? They force them to eat all kinds of medicinal pills and stuff, forcing their chi passageways to expand. That increases their cultivation base, which they then force to rotate, sending cultivation base power through all the holes they poked in them. That in turn creates a small area abundant in spiritual energy. And then, that clan's junior generation can practice cultivation without any spirit stones. Bai Xiaochun's vivid description caused Song Ke to involuntarily think back to the dark times of the past. At the same time, Song Junwan gasped, and her expression turned grim. That's outrageous, she said furiously. She looked over at the bitter expression on Song Q's face, and could tell that Bai Xiaochun was not exaggerating. All of a sudden, she realized why Song Ke had been stumbling for words earlier. Thank you for what you did, Xiaochun, she said. Earlier, she had intended to prevent Bai Xiaochun from saying anything to Song Ke. Instead, she looked at him emotionally, and then gave a curtsying bow at the waist. There's no need for all the formality. Bai Xiaochun replied, I did all of that for you, after all. Clearing his throat, he stepped forward, slipped his arm around her supple waist, and then thumped himself on the chest. You're Quer's aunt, and I'm his uncle. We're family. If I didn't help him out there in the Wildlands, who would? If I didn't save him, who would? It was the proper thing to do, and not a big deal at all. Although Song Junwan's face turned scarlet, she didn't push him away. In fact, her expression softened. Before, she had felt as if they were growing apart, but now, with his hand around her waist, that feeling was gone. When Song Ke saw the entranced look on his aunt's face when she looked at Bai Xiaochun, he sighed. By this point, he regretted coming early to visit. The truth was that if he had known Bai Xiaochun would show up, he would rather have been beaten to death than come at this time. Although in some ways he wished he could do something to interfere with Bai Xiaochun's skills in seducing women, he also couldn't help but admire him a bit because of it. He had been there to hear all the details Bai Xiaochun had explained about the Win character enchantment, which helped Zhao Tianzhao win over Chen Yushan. And Song Ke had also been there to witness the confusing relationship that had developed between Bai Xiaochun and Mistress Red Dust. And that wasn't even mentioning Chen Manyao. Now that he thought about it, all of the most beautiful female cultivators seemed to be in some sort of relationship or another with Bai Xiaochun. In the end, Song Ke could only sigh and muse about how the heavens apparently favored Bai Xiaochun. He considered revealing the truth to his aunt, and telling her about Chen Manyao and Mistress Red Dust. But then he realized that Bai Xiaochun was giving him a glare of warning, and his heart seized up. Sighing, he looked at the entranced expression on his aunt's face, and finally realized that it was a really awkward situation. After blurting out a random excuse, he left. Outside, he felt much better. Shaking his head, he noticed some nearby Bloodstream Division disciples looking at him. At that point, he straightened up, feeling the pride that a chosen nascent soul cultivator should feel. The disciples bowed in greeting, and his confidence began to return. Bai Xiaochun and Song Junwan were now alone in her immortals cave. It was a rare situation. Before, the fighting had been fierce in the battle, but now that they were together, Song Junwan abandoned any attempts to prevent her feelings from showing. That was especially true considering what Bai Xiaochun had told her about Song Q's situation, and how much danger he had faced to rescue him. Song Junwan could tell that Bai Xiaochun had done all of those things for her sake. And in the end, he had brought Song Ke back, not only safe, but also having broken through to the nascent soul stage. Gaze warm, she smoothed out some of the wrinkles in his garment, and spoke some sincere words of concern. Considering they were now alone, most of the flush had left her face. Bai Xiaochun felt very relaxed in her presence, and could tell how much she cared for him. Eventually they sat down on a divan, whereupon Bai Xiaochun began to brag about some of the details of how he'd rescued Songke. Of course, he emphasized his own role in the situation, making sure it was clear that without him, Songke would probably never have escaped. The entire time, he kept on measuring up Song Junwan. Although they hadn't seen each other for years, Song Junwan was as spectacularly beautiful as ever. Her makeup was applied perfectly, emphasizing eyebrows that curved as gracefully as willow leaves. Her eyes glittered like pools of deep water, making it seem as if she were waiting for him to guess what she was thinking. Bai Xiaochun's heart suddenly began to race. Song Junwan was curvaceous and smoking hot, with mouth-watering curves everywhere. There was something shockingly bewitching about her, especially considering how provocatively she dressed. Bai Xiaochun swallowed a few times, marveling inwardly at what a vixen she was. Without even thinking about it, he began to compare her to Mistress Red Dust, and eventually sighed in the realization that in terms of physique and beauty, Song Junwan clearly came out on top. Suddenly, he realized something. After being thrown down onto the ground in the jungle by Mistress Red Dust, a new world had opened up to him. When Song Junwan realized that Bai Xiaochun was secretly checking her out, her heart began to beat more rapidly. A flirtatious expression appeared on her face, and she looked at him closely, pretending she hadn't noticed the look in his eyes. She also leaned forward a bit, revealing even more curves than before. However, after a long moment, it was clear that Bai Xiaochun was merely looking at her and wasn't going to make a move. A spark of anger rose up in her heart, quenching some of her passion. A cold expression even appeared on her face. "Well," she said primly, "since there's nothing better to do, I guess I'll go meditate." Bai Xiaochun's eyes widened in shock. Everything had been going well moments ago, to the point where Song Junwan seemed gripped by passion. But in the blink of an eye, it all changed. It was very strange. Suddenly, he realized that asking about Hu Xiaomei right now probably wouldn't be the best idea. Blinking a few times, he decided to feel the situation out. "Well, I guess I'll head out." Heart burning with anger that she couldn't control, Song Junwan glared at him for a moment, and then let out a cold harumph. "See yourself out." Bai Xiaochun was really confused. Sighing, he mused that women were definitely very strange creatures, both Mistress Red Dust and Song Junwan alike. Could it be that all older women are like this? Convinced that this was the case, he decided that he really missed Hu Xiaomei. She was definitely the most well-behaved of them all. Rubbing his nose, he rose to his feet and said, "Well, I guess I really will take off." As he did, Song Junwan closed her eyes and ignored him. Bai Xiaochun's awkwardness was now starting to turn into a bit of anger. Flicking his sleeve, he turned to walk off. However, he only got about 7 or 8 steps before Song Junwan's voice rang out. "How long are you going to stick around this time?" In no mood to deal with her antics, he replied, "Oh, I don't know. After all the sect matters are taken care of, I need to take a trip to the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect." Then he continued on his way. Song Junwan opened her eyes and looked at him walking away. As of this moment, she realized that, considering Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base and talent, it wasn't reasonable to expect him to stay in the river-defying sect forever, even if it was his home. Furthermore, she couldn't help but wonder, after he left, how long would it be before she saw him again? When she thought about that, and about how distant he had seemed when she caught sight of him on the battlefield, she began to struggle inwardly. If she couldn't hold on to him right now, then as time passed, they would grow further apart, and their relationship would definitely cool. Eventually, it would probably become nothing more than a memory. The sect had faced many dramatic situations over the years, and she had seen many couples parted by death. Besides, she had no idea if she would be able to break out from the core formation stage and into the nascent soul stage, which meant that she had no idea how long she would actually live. The only thing she knew was that, over all the years, Bai Xiaochun was the only person to have tantalized her without sickening her. After everything that had gone on between the two of them, he was the one person she could never stop thinking about. At that point, the struggle in her eyes transformed into determination. She was the devil witch of the Bloodstream sect, not a member of the righteous and orthodox Spirit Stream sect. As her hesitation vanished, decisiveness enveloped her. She stretched out on the divan, making sure every inch of her beautiful figure was on display. Then she spoke in a voice that would stab deep into the heart of anyone who heard it. "Xiaochun, come here. I want to show you something." As soon as her voice entered his ears, it felt like a hand had grabbed onto his heart. After shivering for a moment, he snorted coldly. "Whatever it is, I don't want to see it." Those were the words which left his mouth, and yet, he stopped walking, and even turned around, to see Song Junwan reclined sultrily on the divan. His heart began to pound even harder. However, he reminded himself that in the face of a vixen like this, he had to control himself and act like normal. Eyes glittering, she beckoned at him with her finger. Be a good boy, now. Why won't you come over here? I'm not going to bite you. Heart racing, Bai Xiaochun gave another cold snort. Glaring, he strode over to her, stuck his chin up, and loudly said, Me? Afraid of you? I think not. All right, what do you want to show me? Covering a smile with her hand, she looked up at him, snagging his gaze as surely as if with a hook. Even as he gasped in surprise, she patted her bag of holding, producing a medicinal pill which she held up in 2 fingers. Do you see what this is? Bai Xiaochun's jaw dropped, a bit displeased that this was what Song Junwan wanted to show him. It turned out it was just a medicinal pill. Sighing, he looked a bit closer, drawing upon his skill in the Tao of medicine to identify it. Oh, it's an aphrodisiac pill. Hey, how did you get? Suddenly he gasped, and thought back to Mistress Red Dust. And yet, before he could do anything, a flush spread out across Song Junwan's face, and her eyes flashed as she crushed the pill. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.